Why do people say that there was a sudden shift in 77 with Islamization?
When martial law came in July 77, I think it brought about a tremendous change, which was lost initially in the confusion that followed and the political situation. But as far as women are concerned, it certainly very quickly after 77, they began to be aware of the impact of the new order on their lives. And this happened as a result of the policies of Islamization. And I think it's important to remember something which we forget, that with the coming of 77 and martial law, it was well before the ordinances began coming in one after the other that actually women began to feel the change, a perceptible change, not something that they understood very well initially, but certainly their lives changed, and in public places, visibly, the clothes they wear, their presence, everything which had been taken for granted now began to be questioned. And there were several incidents. It sort of started as a sort of a campaign almost. There were several incidents which people would report. I went to the bakery today and somebody told me this horrific story that a woman came in whose head was not covered and a man standing outside just got up and slapped her. Or, I went for a walk with my brother in the park and suddenly somebody came up to me and said, "What is your relationship with this man?" So, the change in attitude, the shift in attitude, the feeling of insecurity, the feeling of vulnerability, the feeling that suddenly all eyes were on you and you couldn't just go about your business the way that you were a few months previously. That is what actually happened well before the ordinances and the orders and the martial law regulations, which made it more tangible, which made it more visible, it made it more clearer what the situation was. So I think that 77, almost immediately after 77.
But if you were to put your finger on it, what is the crux of it? What was the state trying to do?
I think the state was trying to enter our lives and our homes. And it was taking over our space. It was taking over our bodies. It was taking over our minds. It was taking up our sheer presence. Just the presence of women had suddenly become a question for debate, which it had never been previous to this.
What was the reason for it? Why would the state be interested?
Well, I think that obviously General Zia-ul-Haq, with Islamization, although one would have thought that there were many more important matters to be dealt with Islamization, his immediate response was, or not his immediate response, he unleashed those forces. After all, don't forget that the Jamaat-e-Islami was a very important component of the early ministry. Don't forget that the Minister of Information was a Jamaatiya. So suddenly, what we had always imagined and feared and which we had read about, which had been reflected in earlier National Assembly debates, in the Constituent Assembly debates, when we read what Begum Shah Nawaz and Begum Shasta Ikramullah had written, that it is the presence of women, it is their participation in public life, which is offensive to the orthodox and the fundamentalist element. Suddenly in 77, this fear was actualized. We actually saw it happening, that the first target was women.
And yet women didn't do anything about it for a while.
I think it took women a long time to realize what was actually happening. I think that women did start, because as I say, the press picked up, despite the fact that the press was controlled at that time. But I mean, these episodes, these incidents, they were growing daily. And I think that women initially were quite taken aback. And certainly a lot of women who had perhaps been protected by their class or their particular status in society, middle class women, upper middle class women, who never had to suffer the kind of indignities that perhaps other classes had, now suddenly found that, their presence, their apparel, their clothes, everything had become, a subject to be discussed or debated, or a controversial matter. So I think necessarily it had to take some time before the grouping took place. And certainly the grouping was taking place. I think that, starting from homes and starting from, gatherings where people discuss this, eventually women did coalesce around this issue and did take it up. Unfortunately, the effect of ordinances was also late. The Hudud ordinance came in 1971, but the Fehmida Alabakhsh case,
79.
In 79, sorry. But the Fehmida Alabakhsh case only came up in 1981, which was the first test case. And, the birth of WAF is directly related to that. So the effect of the ordinances was also delayed, and I think that the horror of it was eventually unleashed when punishments of stoning and punishments of lashing, actually, there was a threat of them being carried out. And that is when all that had been building up, people talking to each other and saying the situation is intolerable, it cannot go on, it all came together for women in 1981, but really it had been building up for a long time prior to that.
What exactly in terms...
Okay.
The Fehmida Alabakhsh case was the first case under the Hudud ordinance, which galvanized individual women as well as women's organizations into action. And that was the birth of the Women's Action Forum, which initially started off as an umbrella organization or as a platform for individuals, organizations, and groups who were concerned with the situation of women in Pakistan. Eventually, of course, we know that WAF became a separate organization. But this was the first of many cases that was to be taken up by the Women's Action Forum and actually taken to court. And a pressure was created around it. And this is how the Women's Action Forum came into existence.
How did you actually, given that it was martial law and there was such strict censorship, how did it operate? I mean, what was WAF doing?
Well, it was very difficult to operate initially because, it was as if there was a deathly silence everywhere. With censorship of the press, there was no way of really communicating this growing movement and its concerns. So initially, women made use of a lot of material. We published posters, we made cassettes, we sang songs, we, mobilized in small groups, and we did manage to get through some of these things into the press, but it was a very heavily censored press to begin with. So the mobilization was intense, and it was almost word of mouth, talking to people, trying to enlarge the circle, trying to create a lot of positions, clarifying our own thoughts, gathering strength, getting in touch with women and other organizations. And then eventually, of course, it built up to, a massive public demonstration, which in a way is a turning point, I feel, for the women's movement in Pakistan.
What specifically are you talking about, and what issue was it on?
Sorry, need to repeat.
You're talking about the Julus?
I'm talking about the Julus. I mean, what the issue is? The issue is
Law of
the
evidence.
law of evidence. So that's what you want.
Yeah.
Okay. All this was... as I said, that initially, when we got together, it was simply because of an atmosphere that was being created, and women were feeling particularly vulnerable. And we didn't really realize the implications of the Hudud ordinance when it was passed. But very soon, we understood what it was. And when the government passed the Hudud ordinance in 1984, I think that women realized that... Yes, sorry. Well, the law of evidence was passed in 84.
Forget about those.
Sorry, go back on that.
The law of evidence issue, the government proposed it by about 82, whatever, and the debate was going on. It was eventually... Yes. What about the law of evidence? Say that was a major issue for us.
The law of evidence, which was proposed earlier, and was, a lot was being written about it. And women decided that this was a major issue, and this time round they were prepared.
Why was it a major issue?
Because the law of evidence proposed that the evidence of two women would be equal to that of one man, and it was, the Hudud ordinance had almost gone by default, and this time round women were more prepared, and they were not prepared any longer to suffer any legislation which was discriminatory or oppressive or reduced the status of women. And this was a very clear instance of all these things coming together. So several women's organizations got together, individual women got together, and they decided that they would march to the High Court and present a petition there against the law of evidence. They gathered on the 12th of February on Hall Road, Charing Cross, and they were surrounded by police. I mean, it was an incredible sight because, it's sort of four roads coming together, and they were blocked on all three sides. Although permission had earlier been taken, and we had said that this would be a very peaceful demonstration and that we would just march very peaceably up to the High Court, present our petition, and disperse. But obviously the anger had been building up, and the frustration and just the outrage had been building up in women. And so when we were prevented from moving forward, and there was a barricade of police, of women police, of male police, and they were fully equipped and fully armed, and they were carrying tear gas and very formidable and very threatening. When they refused us permission to go through, I think we just moved as one mass. I don't think we had to consult. I don't think we just knew what we had to do. And we just broke through the cordon and we just rushed forward. And it was, nobody broke ranks, nobody moved away, and the assault, the ferocity of the assault, it was immediate. The lathi charge, the tear gas, the viciousness, and I think that, I don't know, how adrenaline was being pumped into our systems, because we just knew that this was it. It was a do or die situation. And the incredible thing is that the several hundred women who had collected, nobody ran away. Don't forget that this is the very first demonstration against martial law. That nobody had had the courage to come out and defy, the state forces. But nobody. And it was a sort of the first sort of sign of emancipation, the first effort to break through this silence that had been erected, and the ordinances were rolling in and everything, and nobody was in a position to speak up. It wasn't that there was no opposition in the country, but it was that nobody really had been able to get out and say anything. And here were women who just decided almost as one that they were going to. And eventually what happened was that about 30 women were picked up immediately. They were, dragged literally by their hair and into the vans that were waiting on the side. And the rest of the women made it to the High Court and presented the petition. And I think that this has been a turning point not only for the women's movement in Pakistan, but really for the revival of democracy and democratic institutions in Pakistan.
Subsequently, WAF has been involved in a range of issues and been operating, or what has been the type of mobilization, what have been some of the issues picked up by WAF?
Well, WAF has picked up a whole range of issues. Some of these issues have dealt specifically with laws, like the law of evidence was one, the proposed law at that time of Diyat and Qasas was one. And then of course we started this campaign against the Hudud ordinance. It was late, but still the effects of the Hudud ordinance. We picked up the Safiya Bibi case, which was a case of a blind woman who had been held under the Hudud ordinance. We campaigned against the Women's University. We campaigned against segregations in institutions. We campaigned against banning of women from spectator sports. We campaigned against a whole range of issues. For example, all these directives that were given that women must wear chadars, and in offices, in government offices, and in schools and in colleges. We campaigned against that. So there was a whole range, and as we campaigned, the mobilization grew. In fact, the mobilization of WAF really grew tremendously after the 12th of February demonstration. I think that people felt that we spoke for what we believed in, and that we were now ready to take action. And we ourselves were astonished at the number of women who joined us, who came, who helped us. Those who would not or could not make it to the street would sit up all night making posters, would travel with us all over the city putting up those posters, would help us prepare music programs, would appear on the stage in music programs or help behind the stage, anything that they could do, cutting, clipping, pasting, going everywhere. I mean, the whole movement just burgeoned and grew after that.
Just very briefly, how does WAF function? You said it was an organization.
Yes, I know. I told you that, it started off as a sort of a platform and an umbrella and grew into an organization. But when it grew and developed into an organization, I think that there were certain principles that we wished to establish. This was not going to be the usual kind of an organization with a president or a chairperson or anything. We wanted a non-hierarchical organization. We wanted collective decision making as best as we could. And we didn't believe in personal projection. We felt that, it is the ideas of WAF, the struggle of WAF, which should be projected. And so we worked together. And in fact, a lot of the material we prepared, or a lot of the statements that we prepared, or our public conferences, we tried to involve as many women as possible in it, and not just have a few faces, that would keep reappearing. And I think that a lot of women gathered a lot of confidence because these were female gatherings, and this was an occasion for them to speak up, to express themselves. And so we have a working committee, and we have a general body, and we have elections to the working committee. So the working committee does change, and there is a general body which issues the directives, and the implementing body is the working committee.
WAF is not a political organization, and yet the women's issue, one would think, is a political issue.
I think for strategic reasons, and also because of the climate in which we were operating, we chose to say that WAF is a non-political organization, or people thought that we were a non-political organization, which does not mean that we were an apolitical organization, because obviously everything is linked to politics. But we had to devise certain specific strategies and tactics to meet the needs of the time. And the women's issue is linked up, I mean, there is no question of it, but that the women's issue is linked up with the larger issue of democratic rights in Pakistan and in Pakistani society. And Women's Action Forum has never divorced itself from those issues, but it is not aligned to any one specific political party, although its natural allies are very clear, its natural alliances are very clear. Obviously, we stand for a progressive democratic order, as some would say even a secular order. Although in terms of tactics or strategy, we may have felt that it's not wise to bring up certain issues, or it's not politic to bring up certain issues. But certainly, our struggle has always been for an enlightened, progressive society.
But WAF has not made any bridges towards other classes. It has been an urban, middle-class, professional almost phenomena, although I don't mean professional in the sense of getting paid for WAF work, but professionals in their own capacity. So it has not been reaching out, although you say it made links.
I think that it is very true to say that WAF is urban, and it's middle class, and it's largely professional working women. But I don't think that the issues that WAF has picked up have been issues which have been irrelevant to the concerns of the masses of Pakistani women. In fact, a lot of the issues that WAF has picked up may not affect the WAF membership itself directly, but it affects those who are dispossessed in our society. So, when you say that WAF is you're not being able to mobilize or doesn't have grassroots, if that is, if your question is referring to that, I think in terms of mobilization, you are right that we have not been as effective as we might have wanted to be. But on the other hand, in terms of placing squarely women's issues on the national agenda, I think there is no question in my mind, at least, that WAF has been an extremely effective organization.
But WAF has been moving back and forth on what stand to take on religion.
Yes, I think that it's true. I think that there are different positions within WAF on that. But I think it's also true to say that WAF is not a religious organization. It is not a Tablighi Jamaat. It is not an Islamic study group in any sense of the word. WAF recognizes the realities in which it operates. WAF respects people's personal faith and beliefs. I think that there have been women within WAF who have wished to explore the use that has been made of religion by the state. And in that process, they have explored the various positions. In fact, to say that there is no one single Islamic position which the state can impose on us. There is a variety of opinion on it. There are a variety of views on it. And therefore, for the state to assume that there is a single monolithic position. In fact, it is to show the hypocrisy of the state itself, that use in that sense has been made of religion. As I said that, we are a group or we are an organization that respects private beliefs, that believes in religious tolerance. And so there have been people who have, been more interested in exploring the dimension of religion within WAF. But I think WAF as an organization itself has certainly been very clear. I think its functioning has been very secular. I mean, that is my personal belief. I think that it is a secular organization which has made use of certain strategies and tactics, which has opened up a debate within the organization, which has been able to accommodate diverse points of view. But even those who have wanted to explore the religious dimension or wanted to explore Islam in any great depth, I think that by and large they have been very clear that the state has made use of religion and that religion and politics are two completely separate and diverse areas, and that there is no hope for women
And yet there are
any future for women unless these two are declared to be separate.
And yet there are times when WAF has used Islam, WAF as an organization. So isn't there then a contradiction in what you're saying, that it stands for, it's clear that it's secular, and yet it has used Islam?
I think that it has not used Islam. I think it has explored it. It has pointed out, as I said, the differing interpretations within Islam. It has pointed to the more progressive interpretation, knowing full well that the state would never go in for a progressive would not even go in for a progressive interpretation. So that was a tactic. All right, if you believe in Islam, then how about our version of Islam? How about this version? And at no point has the state or the fundamentalists ever picked us women up on those issues. So I think that, I think that a lot of people within WAF would perhaps not like to feel that they used religion. I think they would like to feel that they explored its other dimensions and presented it for the public to look at. So that this fear that I cannot speak up for my rights because I will be speaking up against Islam, it was basically to remove that fear.
Yet there are some within WAF who do say that WAF should not be taking any, should not be using Islam at all, not using even strategically. Within WAF there are people who, members who...
Yes, I think so. I think that this is an ongoing debate. I think this is an ongoing debate in our society, and I think this is an ongoing debate certainly in WAF as well, that we should not openly. But my personal feeling is, when I talk to these people, that really they're also talking about a secular society. Simply what they're saying is that it is strategic not to do so. Our objectives and our goals are the same. So we are differing on tactics and strategy rather than on fundamentals.
But WAF has also not ever taken any positions or had any campaigns to bring about a change in society. It has never moved forward.
Yes, I think you're right. I think that we've been fighting this defensive battle for far too long. that, we really have had to, sort of keep running to stay in the same spot. And this has inhibited our growth, and this has inhibited a lot of things that we could have done. We've not been able to move forward because really the battleground has been defined for us by someone else. We have not defined our own battleground yet.
That someone else being?
That someone else is the state. That someone else is really, issues that are brought up by the fundamentalists, by the state, not by us. We would have wanted to move forward, but we've not been able to do it.
And in the future, how would you expect to be able to? Given the fact that the Sharia bill has also been passed, the space is even more limited.
That's right. It's a cat and mouse game that the state is playing with us. Because the strange thing is that the law of evidence in its original form, the proposed law of diyat and qisas in its original form, were far more damaging. And therefore, our struggle was very clear and we knew. But as a result of our struggle, they were diluted. And so eventually the form in which they were passed were much diluted, and this has created a lot of confusion in society. And this in fact has had an adverse effect on our struggle, and the same has happened with the Shariat bill. That the original Sami Latif bill was absolutely horrendous. But they knew very well that they couldn't pass something like that. Now, it is a struggle for us to try and explain to people that in fact the implications of what is being passed today are going to be no less damaging. I mean, in a sense, we're reliving 1979 and what happened with the Hudud Ordinance. That it wasn't till 81 that we were clear on what the implications were. And again, the Shariat bill, I fear that the same is going to happen. That when the implications, and I mean it's already happening. I mean all these, the special courts, the 12th Amendment, the 8th Amendment, we indemnify everything, the state dilutes it, the government dilutes it, and our struggle therefore becomes much more difficult. This is another reason why we've not been able to move forward. Because we're always trying to explain that what the intentions of the state and the government are it works very insidiously. And to explain to people takes a long time. And so, you asked me about the future of WAF. I really don't know, because I think that people have to wise up to the games that are being played. And until that happens, WAF is likely to still be fighting on this turf.